Conventional wisdom is that the more plies you have of toilet paper, the more comfortable it is, right? I mean, nobody wants to use one ply toilet paper. Well, consider this. If 2 ply is more comfortable than 1 and 3 is more comfortable than 2, then, okay, couldn't you just sit here and basically say, oh, well, the more ply, the better? Well, what about 5? What about 10? What about 500? Do you realize that 500 ply toilet paper would actually literally be a 2x4 at that point in time? But nobody would consider that comfortable toilet paper, right? This is my brilliant metaphor to get into the subject of extremes. Extremes to either end can be really bad. Last week we went over some things that Solomon was saying in the book of Ecclesiastes and how he was talking about that you don't want to sit here and over-fixate, when it comes to your work. You don't want to over-fixate when it comes to trying to procure material wealth and things. You don't want to sit here and fixate on your knowledge and your wisdom and your sophistication. You don't want to fixate on these things. But what's interesting is if you go through the rest of Ecclesiastes, you'll see him start saying almost the exact opposite from time to time. At least it might seem like that at first. He'll go from saying, you shouldn't sit here and work yourself to death, to turning right back around and saying, what more is there for a man to do than to eat, drink, and enjoy his toil? You see, what Solomon is really doing is not so much saying, absolutely not, you shouldn't work, you should never work because it's completely worthless. He's also not saying that you should be entirely dedicated to your work. He's trying to say avoid the extremes. Don't get on one end or the other end, because when you do that, it starts driving you towards very negative places. I think extremism is something that we've all become, unfortunately, all too aware of. I mean, you can sit here and look at the media, and you can look at the people around you, and everything from politics to social causes to, religion and personal beliefs, medical care. All these things have become so polarized today, and really you can bring it all back to the subject of extremism and all the negative things that does. Here in just a second, you guys are going to read one of the excerpts that Solomon has in Ecclesiastes that specifically talks about extremism. But as you go through this talk, what I want you to think about is how extremism impacts your relationships with other people and how it ultimately robs you of your happiness. Eventually, where we're going to go with this is you're going to see how extremism leads us to become fixated on the things of this world. It leads us to have this unquenchable appetites for whatever thing it is we're being extreme about. We have to see our political parties and our politicians get more and more and more. We have to see more and more people adopt our beliefs about, medicine or social policy or whatever it is. And we're never really truly happy. It ends up ultimately robbing us of our peace and our inner sense of contentment. There's a song that a artist named John Rubin did with Toby Mac and a couple of other Christian artists, and in there he has this line where he says that to be content was the dream come true. That's something that I feel like Solomon is really bringing up here, is that contentment is really what so many of us are after. But when we have the world throwing all these things at us that we have to be better, we have to be richer, we have to be smarter, we have to be better looking, we have to have more social acceptance or more people on our side of a particular issue, then ultimately ends up robbing us of that peace and contentment. So you're going to continue reading a little bit more in Ecclesiastes here, but one of the things that you're going to see is how Solomon basically takes the attitude that, God, you've put us where you've put us. You've put us in places that are where you've chosen to bless us, and places where you have appointed and decided that it's good for us to struggle in the here and now. And we can sit here and we can, cry and we can lash out at God or at the world for that it's not fair where life has placed us or that somebody else has it easier than us. But ultimately, does any of that really truly matter? I mean, what we were just going over last week was about how the pursuit of all these things is ultimately meaningless. So why should it bother us if somebody else has more? Why should it bother us if somebody else is getting some additional advantages that we're not getting? Why should it bother us? Ultimately, where we are is exactly where God has placed us. And so if our eyes are truly fixed on what God has in store for us and in store for our lives, shouldn't that be enough? Now, there in your groups, you probably ended there with Luke 12, verse 34. And if you didn't, you might want to go back and take a look at it, because Christ says a really, really profound thing there, as he tends to do throughout the entire Bible. But he says, wherever our treasure is, that's where our heart is. This is something the world knows. The world knows that wherever we see our wealth and our prosperity, that's where our heart is going to be, and that's what we're going to be emotionally invested in. And the same can be said in reverse. If they can convince us that our heart should be in a certain place, then they can profit and get treasure in a different place where they want to see it. If they can convince us that our heart should be solely focused on the political causes of the day, then they can cause us to reallocate our treasure from where it should be into things that benefit them. It can cause us to, invest our emotional energy, our physical treasure. It can cause us to invest our peace of mind, our attention spans, which can be profitable to some of these groups, in things that they want that benefit them. That's what the world wants to do, and it wants to distract us and cause us to feel anxious about everything else in the world besides the only thing that really is worthy to truly be anxious about. Well, that's kind of a weird phrase, right? I mean, something that's worthy to be anxious about. Well, what is that? Well, it's funny because I'm talking about the dangers of extremism and how Solomon wants us to ward off extremism, but a little bit later in chapter 12, as you guys will read, what you end up seeing there in Luke is Christ himself talking about something that sounds very extreme. It's Christ explaining the fact that he didn't necessarily come so that everybody could sit around and cross arms and sing Kumbaya in the world. Christ says that, in fact, he actually didn't come to unite, but to divide. And specifically what he's talking about there is dividing the things that are sinful and the things of this world from the things that are holy and focused on eternity. That right there is something that is worth our time feeling a little bit anxious about. Not anxious because we're nervous about it, or anxious because we worry if God's really going to, come through on all the things that he said he's going to do, but anxious because it's something that we eagerly await. It's something that we can't wait until one day we can sit here and be in heaven and be reconciled with Christ, be reconciled with our Creator who loved us so much that he sent his son to die on a cross. That's a good form of extremism. It's something that moves us to do things in an extreme way. Because let me go ahead and throw this at you. What more extreme action has there ever been in all of human history than for the fact that God, the creator of mankind, would come to earth and would die a death that he didn't deserve to die so that we could be absolved of the penalty of our sin? That is an extreme thing that God did for us. It's arguably the only truly extreme thing that has ever happened in the scope of eternity. And when that happens, and when that is the thing that our hearts are focused on, and that is where we find our treasure, then it leads us ultimately to do other extreme things. You guys in your groups, talk for a second about how those extreme things are different than the extreme things we see the world wanting us to do. There's a big difference between finding a sense of security and belonging in extreme political and social causes and extreme debates that are out there in the public commons versus an extreme love, an extreme compassion, an extreme forgiveness that causes us to act with an extreme affection and compassion to the world around us. We all know that extremism can be a very, very dangerous thing. I mean, in many forms. And it can be easy to look at it and basically just say, well, I have so many things that I'm being told I have to have an opinion on and I have to care passionately about that I just don't have anything left in the tank. I don't have anything left to give for anything that I can't see right in front of my face. But that's the trap we have to avoid. We have to avoid the trap of getting sucked into every single outrage culture moment where we could get really wrapped up in what this company is doing or what that TV station is saying or what that politician is trying to do. We could get wrapped up in all these things, or we could basically just chill. We could just try to hang back and be content with where God has placed us. Yes, we're not necessarily in a big Garden of Eden where we stand right now, but this is where God has put us. And we can either try to lash out at the world, and we can try to change it, we can try to move it to whatever the thing is that we would rather see the world be, or we can take stock of the fact that Christ has put us in the here and now for a specific reason. He has a plan for us. He has things He wants us to do. And so if we're going to be extreme, let's be extreme in things that build up treasure that's everlasting. Let's be extreme in how we reach out to one another. Let's be extreme in how we disregard our own selfish desires and ambitions, and be extreme about how we reach out to the hurting, to the poor, and to the lost that surround us each and every single day. I'm glad that you could join us again, and as we say every single week, until we can meet again, God bless.